You watch a Breakfast Central on News Central. We are Africa First. Let's begin in South Africa this morning, where the security company that was contracted to guard the South African prison where convicted rapist and murderer Thabo Bester faked his death and which he escaped from has failed to appear before the country's parliament.
Now, the G4S Correctional Services, a multinational security company, had been summoned by the Justice and Correctional Services Portfolio Committee over the company's alleged complicity in Bester's prison escape. But instead of appearing earlier this week, the security bosses sent their lawyers.
Well, according to G4S, it was not issued an invitation to take part in the meeting by the Department of Justice and Correctional Services. Bester has been on the run since it came to light in March this year he had escaped. Well, joining us now to discuss this further is the Justice Portfolio Committee member advocate Glynis Brittenback. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you, Glynis, for joining us. Go ahead. You wanted to say something?
Oh, no, I just said good morning to you and to everybody.
All right, great. Let's go into it right now. Now, has the security company has been invited over time. They needed to show up, but what we're hearing is they did not. But has the security company given the portfolio committee official reasons for not actually appearing in court? Are there reasons for this?
Well, they were invited to a meeting of the portfolio committee called specifically to interrogate what precisely had happened with this Thabo Bester debacle and to try and get to the true facts, because there was so much speculation circulating. It's also taken more than a year for this to be brought to our attention, and it took the efforts of a publication called Ground Up, so civil society again, alerting us to this problem. It was never brought to our attention either by G4S or by the Department of Correctional Services. So everybody was invited to the meeting, including G4S. They sent us a note late on Monday. The meeting was on Tuesday. They sent us a letter late on Monday saying that they would not appear as they required to be summoned. They say they needed the protection afforded them by the Powers and Privileges Act. And so the meeting convened on Tuesday morning. The committee decided unanimously to not proceed with the inquiry on Tuesday because we felt that G4S was an essential component and that we in fact needed to hear their version first before we interrogated the rest of the story. But while we were having these discussions, they sent an attorney and an advocate to the meeting. While claiming they were not invited, they nevertheless managed to send legal representatives to the meeting, who then sat at the back of the meeting and never introduced themselves. So we, quite by chance, found out that they were present, and then they introduced themselves and said that they were there on watch and brief, and that their client required to be summoned. So that process has now been set in motion. The Speaker will summons them to the next meeting, to a date to be determined, along with other role players that will now also be summoned.
Okay. Now, Advocate Glynis, the G4S Correctional Service is a security outlet that, as we understand, should lead by example, if for anything, because a lot of other security outlets are looking out for that. And then they were summoned to court and refused to appear. Instead, they sent their lawyers. So what happens now? Are they just going to get away without being held accountable for this?
Most certainly not. You must understand that the Portfolio Committee of Parliament is not a court. The Portfolio Committee of Justice and Correctional Services has oversight over the Department of Correctional Services in South Africa. We have oversight over their operations to a degree, and certainly to their expenditure. G4S is contracted to the Department of Correctional Services, and in that fashion we have oversight over that particular prison, the Manhunt prison in Bloemfontein. It's a privately run prison, one of two in South Africa. And certainly they will be held accountable, A, for what happened there, and B, for the way that they have approached this matter. We certainly have questions about how they've approached the matter. So but it's not a court, it's a portfolio committee of Parliament.
Well, let's take a look at this. I mean, the G4S and the Department of Correctional Services both did not report this matter to the committee. Are there any legalities around that? And would you like to share with us?
Well, there's a number of questions that arise. Certainly, Thabo Bester is a convicted murderer and multiple rapist. He's clearly a danger to society. He's been on the run or out of prison for a year. Certainly, questions should have arisen and must have arisen with regards to this escape. It's almost it's inconceivable that it was a spur of the moment thing. It was obviously very well planned, and many people must have been involved. So it is something that should have been brought to the attention, certainly of DCS and absolutely to the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services. So we hope to determine when we meet what the sequence of events was. When it became clear that it wasn't Bester who had been in that cell, when it became clear that it wasn't him, what were the action steps that were taken and when were they taken, so that we can build a proper timeline so that we can form a view of who is responsible for what.
Okay.
With regards to the fact.
All right, Advocate Glynis, also we hear that the correctional services say that those involved in the Thabo Bester prison escape will be punished. Now, the first step to do that is to know how many people are engaged in this in the first place and how soon will the punishment take place. I mean, you just mentioned that they will not go scot-free, they have to be held accountable. So how soon do you think that this punishment will take effect?
Well, it's an important matter. There's a dangerous and convicted criminal on the loose. Multiple women must have testified against him in rape cases. They're victims, they remain victims. They're rape survivors. In South Africa, violence very seriously. These women were never warned. They had no idea that he was out. The horrific possibility that they could run into him somewhere is too terrible to think of. So yes, there will certainly be consequences, and they will be as soon as possible. There are multiple investigations on the go. Correctional Services is doing their own investigation. The Parliamentary Portfolio Committee is now looking very, very seriously and with deep scrutiny at this matter. The Judicial Inspectorate of the prisons is also looking at the matter, and so there are multiple reports being compiled, and there's a great sense of urgency.
Well, the Police Minister, Becky Cele, had spoken about this issue and said very soon the Facebook and the rapist will actually be convicted. I mean, I know you've been following this case very closely as well, but do you think Becky Cele's comments in terms of assuring South Africans that he will be caught very soon and that they've made headway as the police officers are indeed following very closely, how true is this, and is there a possibility that Bester can be caught? Because there are also rumors that he's outside of South Africa, is possibly moved to Zimbabwe or Zambia. I mean, what's the latest that you've gotten concerning that?
Well, we only have, of course, there's a police investigation, and they also were there on Tuesday. We were not able to hear the report because the matter was postponed. But, well, you know, it's difficult often to take terribly seriously what Mr. Taylor says. It appears to me as if the police have little idea where he is and are belatedly investigating properties where he stayed. There are news reports circulating that a vehicle belonging to them was found abandoned at the Zimbabwe border. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. We've not had the opportunity of interrogating that information terribly deeply right now. But certainly, if Mr. Bester was able to put together this escape, which has the proportions of a bad Hollywood movie, then he clearly has access to a large amount of money. And I sincerely hope that he's still within the borders of South Africa and that he can be caught quickly. But there's also a possibility that he's already left the country. That doesn't mean that he won't be found. He will be found. He will be found and he will be brought back here and he will face the consequences of his actions.
Portfolio Committee member, Advocate Glenys Breton-Back, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts on this development.